Harlem never sleeps. But that night, even the streets held their breath. 3. The KKK had broken into the neighborhood. They didn't just threaten Harlem, they grabbed Bumpy Johnson's wife. 200 armed men thought they had power. They thought fear belonged to them. They were wrong. Because when Bumpy showed up, every single man in that warehouse froze. Not a twitch, not a blink. And what he did next would haunt Harlem forever. Beat music rises. Stay with me. You won't believe the lengths a man will go to protect his family and his empire. Harlem never truly slept. But that night, even the streets seemed to hold their breath. Neon lights flickered over rain, slicked sidewalks. 3. Casting long shadows that danced like ghosts. The faint hum of jazz drifted from a nearby club. Soft and melancholy. But it did nothing to cover the whispers of danger that slithered through the alleys. People hurried past, heads down, boots clattering on the cracked concrete. 3. As if the city itself knew that something terrible was about to happen. In the midst of this restless city walked Ellsworth, Bumpy Johnson. Calm, composed, and impossibly sharp. 3. He moved with a quiet confidence that demanded attention even in the shadows. Harlem had learned to respect him, even fear him. He wasn't a man who boasted about his power. You could see it in the way he surveyed a room, the way his eyes missed nothing, the way people instinctively stepped aside when he walked by. He had built an empire in the streets, not with chaos, but with calculated precision. But that night, a chill ran deeper than the winter wind. A terror unlike any other had reached him. The KKK had made a move, and it was personal. They had crossed a line that no one survived crossing. They had grabbed Bumpy's wife. The news hit like a hammer, though Bumpy did not show it. There was no shout, no wild gesture, no curse. 3. He simply exhaled a plume of smoke from his cigarette, letting it curl into the air like a warning. His eyes, usually so calm, hardened. They became cold, cutting, in a quiet backroom poker game. The clinking of chips sounded like gunfire. His men froze, sensing the sudden tension. Their instincts screaming that something had changed. Bumpy stood, straightened his coat, and whispered under his breath. They just made the deadliest mistake of their lives. Every word carried weight. Every syllable was a promise that would be paid in blood if necessary. Bumpy's reputation was built on more than fear. He was clever, strategic, and lethal when the situation demanded it. The streets of Harlem knew this, and even those who hated him respected it. But this threat was different. It wasn't just territory, money. 3. Or a rival's pride, it was family. And the moment someone touches a man's family, all bets are off. He gathered his closest allies quickly and silently. Men who had stood by him through every betrayal, every street battle, every back alley negotiation. They moved like shadows, blending into the darkness as Bumpy relayed what he knew. Every alley, every informant, every whispered tip was part of a larger map he was drawing in his mind. He didn't rush. Patience had always been his weapon, And tonight, it would be the difference between life and death. The city outside carried on oblivious. Jazz flowed, taxis honked, voices echoed from street corners. 3. But Harlem's underworld knew that something had shifted. Whispers spread from one shadow to another, growing in urgency and fear. Bumpy Johnson was moving, and when he moved, consequences followed. He traced the kidnapper's movements with meticulous care, following the faintest trails. Abandoned buildings, back alleys, secret doorways. Harlem had hidden corners, and he knew them all. Every step was measured, every plan precise. His men moved like extensions of his will, silent, lethal, ready for anything. No one could guess his true plan until the final moment. Hours passed. The trail led him closer, each clue sharpening the tension. Harlem itself seemed to hold its breath, as if the city knew that the king of the streets was hunting. The shadows deepened, and every noise, a distant footstep, a creak of a door, made the heart beat faster. The streets were alive with danger. 3. But Bumpy thrived in it. He had learned long ago that fear was both a weapon and a shield, and tonight, it surrounded him like armor. By the time he reached the outskirts of the city, he was ready. The warehouse loomed in the distance, dark and imposing. Inside, 200 men were waiting, armed, dangerous, confident. Most would have cowered. Most would have begged if they faced a man like Bumpy Johnson alone. But he wasn't alone, and he was no ordinary man. Every step he took toward that building made the world feel heavier, slower. Every heartbeat was a drum counting down the moment that fate would collide with fury. Bumpy paused at the edge of the street, letting the shadows cloak him. He lit another cigarette, took a slow draw, and exhaled. He didn't need to shout. He didn't need to wave a gun. 3. The weight of his reputation alone carried a message: cross him, threaten his family, and there would be no mercy. Harlem had heard of him, feared him, and now, in that moment, those men were about to learn the full measure of that fear. And then he moved forward, into the dark, into the unknown, ready to do what every man in Harlem knew he could do: protect his own at any cost, even if it meant making 200 men freeze in terror before their own guns. Bumpy Johnson moved through Harlem like a shadow, invisible yet unstoppable. The night wrapped the city in darkness, and every alley, every cracked sidewalk, every flickering streetlight became part of his hunting ground. He didn't rush. He never rushed. Every step he took was deliberate, measured, calculated. The KKK had made a fatal error, but he needed proof. He needed to know exactly what he was walking into. Panic was for fools, and Bumpy was no fool. The city around him was alive with noise, but he filtered it out. A distant train screeched on the tracks. A cat hissed in the alley. A saxophone wailed in the distance. To anyone else, it might have been normal. But to Bumpy, every sound was a piece of the puzzle. The whispers he had gathered through his network of informants painted a picture. Every movement of the kidnappers, every guard shift, every hidden exit, they all existed in the map, he built in his mind. His men followed silently, shadows among shadows. They had learned the rhythm of his mind, the way he anticipated danger, the way he could read fear like an open book. No words were exchanged. There was no need. They were all part of the same pulse, the same heartbeat of vengeance. Harlem itself seemed to bend around them, holding its breath as the hunt progressed. Bumpy paused outside a crumbling tenement, 3. The faint smell of smoke and rot in the air. He knelt and examined a footprint, its size, its depth. A careless trace, left by overconfidence, revealed more than a map ever could. The men inside had underestimated him, underestimated Harlem, underestimated the consequence of touching a Johnson. He smiled faintly, a predator's grin. This mistake would be their undoing. The trail led them deeper into forgotten parts of the city. Through warehouses abandoned for decades, streets that even the police avoided. Every step brought a new obstacle, a new test of patience. But Bumpy thrived here. These streets were his domain. He knew every shortcut, every hidden door, every blind spot. The city itself became an ally, guiding him closer to the men who dared to challenge him. Finally, they arrived at a massive, dilapidated warehouse on the edge of Harlem. Its windows were dark, broken, the walls scarred by years of neglect. Inside, the kidnappers were confident, smug, thinking they had control. 200 armed men. They believed themselves untouchable. But Bumpy Johnson never relied on numbers. He relied on strategy, fear, and the element of surprise. He crouched in the shadows, observing. Every guard shift, every casual glance, every laugh, he noted it all. His men spread silently around the perimeter, cutting off escape routes, positioning themselves where chaos would be most effective. Bumpy's mind raced, calculating every possibility. 3. He visualized the scene over and over. The moment he would step forward, the exact order of strikes. The psychological paralysis that would make men hesitate. Hours passed. The city's heartbeat slowed around them, every footstep echoing like a drumbeat. Harlem seemed to hold its breath, as if it knew something monumental was about to unfold. The tension was almost unbearable. 3. Even for men hardened by years in the streets. Sweat beaded on brows, fists tightened. But not a single word was spoken. Bumpy didn't speak until the moment demanded it. Finally, he gave the signal. The time had come. The streets were silent witnesses as Bumpy Johnson advanced, step by deliberate step, toward the massive doors of the warehouse. The 200 men inside laughed, a cruel, overconfident sound. They had no idea who was coming for them. No idea that the calm, composed man in the shadows was a force of nature, a living legend, and a nightmare in flesh. He paused just outside the doors, letting the darkness cloak him. His men were ready. 3. Spread like ghosts around the building. He lit a cigarette, the ember glowing like a heartbeat in the dark. Then, he inhaled slowly, exhaling a cloud of smoke that seemed to crawl through the night like a warning. 3. Every man inside that warehouse could feel it, even if they didn't know why. They sensed that fear had arrived. And then, with a single step, he crossed the threshold. Silence fell instantly. Laughter died mid-sentence. 200 men froze, every muscle locked, every heartbeat loud in their ears. Bumpy Johnson had entered their world, and in that moment, he held absolute control. No one moved. No one dared draw a weapon. In the shadows, his eyes scanned every corner, every potential threat. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. The weight of his presence carried the message: threat my family, and you will pay beyond imagination. Every man inside felt the crushing pressure of a force they couldn't see, but could not escape. They had underestimated him, and now they were trapped in the tension he created, prisoners of their own fear. Bumpy's hunt had brought him to the edge of revenge, and the warehouse was now the stage. The tension, the anticipation, the fear, it all waited for a single word, a single movement, to erupt into chaos. And Bumpy Johnson, calm as ever, knew exactly how he would strike. The warehouse was dark, silent, and tense, a place where every sound was magnified. The 200 men inside had been laughing not long ago, full of confidence, certain of their control, but that confidence evaporated the moment Bumpy Johnson stepped through the doorway. The air changed. Shadows seemed to bend toward him, as if the walls themselves recognized his authority. He didn't shout. He didn't draw his gun immediately. There was no need. His presence alone was enough to freeze the room. Every man felt it, every heartbeat loud in their chest. Every hand gripping a weapon suddenly uncertain. 200 armed men, confident and cruel moments ago, now couldn't even lift their guns. Bumpy Johnson didn't move fast. He moved like a predator, calculating every strike, letting fear do most of the work. He walked slowly down the center of the warehouse, each step deliberate, each movement measured. The silence was deafening. The men shifted nervously, eyes darting to one another, looking for reassurance that did not exist. Bumpy's eyes scanned the room like a hawk, calculating, reading, planning. One twitch, one nervous breath, one wrong glance, and he would strike with lethal precision. "Hands off my family," he said, his voice low, deadly, and calm. The words carried weight beyond comprehension. For a moment, the world seemed to hold its breath, every man in the room frozen in place. Not a twitch, not a blink. Every man understood that this was no empty threat. Bumpy Johnson did not bluff. Then the room erupted into chaos. But it wasn't chaos in the way his enemies expected. Bumpy's men moved first, silent and deadly, taking out key threats with surgical precision. Shots rang out, fists collided with skulls, and screams echoed through the warehouse. But Bumpy himself remained calm, moving like a shadow, striking only when absolutely necessary. Every blow, every shot, every movement was purposeful. Each action a lesson in fear and respect. The KKK men tried to organize, to fight back, to regain their sense of control. But Bumpy had already dismantled their confidence before a single bullet was fired. 200 men, armed and trained, had no chance. His calm, 3. Deliberate presence had broken them psychologically before the physical fight even began. Panic spread faster than bullets. Men tripped over one another, turning on each other, falling in the chaos of their own fear. Bumpy's mind worked faster than anyone could imagine. He anticipated every move, predicted every counterattack, and adjusted instantly. One man lunged with a gun, 3. A quick strike from Bumpy's hand, precise and brutal, sent him sprawling to the floor, 3. Another tried to flank him, and before he could act, an ally intercepted, knocking him out cold. Every second in that warehouse was a lesson in strategy, control, and dominance. Even as the fight raged, 3. Bumpy's eyes were constantly aware of his wife's safety, 3. He knew she was somewhere in the shadows of that warehouse, 3, and his calm focus ensured that she would emerge unharmed. His enemies underestimated him because they assumed family was a vulnerability. They were wrong. Protecting his loved ones was the reason he fought with unmatched ferocity. By the time the fight was over, silence returned, heavy and oppressive. The warehouse floor was littered with the unconscious, the terrified, and the defeated. Every man who had thought himself powerful now understood the force they had crossed. 200 men, armed and confident, had faced Bumpy Johnson and could not move. They had frozen at the sight of him, paralyzed by his reputation and presence, D3, and those who had dared challenge him directly had learned their lesson in blood and fear. Bumpy finally stepped back, surveying the aftermath. His wife emerged, shaken but unharmed, and he guided her through the wreckage, every eye in the warehouse still on him. The message was clear, 3. Anyone who threatened his family would pay a price that could not be measured in money, time, or even pain. It was measured in fear, respect, and survival. Harlem would remember this night forever. The story would spread through whispers and rumors, a tale of 200 men frozen, defeated by a single man's presence, intelligence, and fury. Bumpy Johnson had not just won. He had cemented his legend. The city had learned again that crossing him, threatening his family, or underestimating him came at a cost no one could survive. And even as he walked away, silent and composed, the people of Harlem knew that the king of their streets had reminded them why his name carried weight. Bumpy Johnson didn't need to celebrate. His power, his control, and the fear he inspired were proof enough. The KKK had failed. His family was safe, 3. And the streets of Harlem had just witnessed the full measure of a man who refused to be crossed. Dawn broke over Harlem like a cautious whisper, 3. Soft light spilling over the cracked sidewalks and worn brownstones. The city seemed to exhale, after a night of tension, so thick it had felt impossible to breathe. The streets were alive again with the chatter of people who had been unaware of the storm that had raged in the shadows. But those who knew would remember forever. Bumpy Johnson walked through the early morning, mist, his coat buttoned neatly, his hat tilted just so. He moved with the same calm confidence that had carried him through every threat in his life. Behind him, his wife followed, safe, unharmed, her hands trembling slightly, but her eyes reflecting relief. She had seen the legend of Bumpy Johnson firsthand, and she had lived to tell the tale. The whispers had already begun. Harlem talked in hushed tones, half in awe, half in fear. Bumpy Johnson did it again, they said. 200 men froze in his presence. Stories would grow taller with every telling. 3. But the truth was clear to anyone who had witnessed it. Bumpy had bent fear itself to his will. He didn't celebrate. There was no laughter, no triumph, no grandiose gesture. Victory for him was simple. 3. His family was safe, and his enemies had learned their lesson. The streets themselves seemed to bow slightly as he passed, a silent acknowledgement of the power he wielded, the respect he commanded, and the legend he had become. Even among his closest allies, there was a sense of reverence. Men who had fought beside him risked their lives in every alley and warehouse, knew that what they had witnessed was more than a battle. It was a masterclass in control, strategy, and the terrifying aura of a man who refused to be challenged. They had seen fear take physical form, and it had worn the face of Bumpy Johnson. In the quiet moments, Bumpy reflected. He had lived long enough to know that the streets were unforgiving. One wrong step, one miscalculation, and even a man like him could fall. But he had also learned that some things were worth any risk: loyalty, respect, and above all, family. He had shown the city, once again, that there were lines that could never be crossed. 3. And those who tried would pay a price that could not be measured in money, weapons, or force. 3. It would be measured in fear, in paralysis, in the stark reminder of who truly controlled the streets. 3. The people of Harlem would tell the story for decades. Mothers would warn their children not to test him. Rivals would pause before challenging him. 3. Even those far beyond the city's borders would learn that Bumpy Johnson was not a man to be trifled with. And in the quiet corners of the city, where shadows stretched long and danger lurked, his name became a shield and a warning. But Bumpy didn't let the legend define him. He returned to his home with his wife, guiding her through the streets with the same care and vigilance he had shown throughout the hunt. Every look, every step, was a reminder that the streets were his, but they were also hers, and he would protect them both at any cost. This was the man Harlem both feared and loved. Ruthless when necessary, compassionate when it mattered, and always in complete control. As the sun climbed higher, painting the city in shades of gold and gray, Bumpy paused at a street corner. He lit a cigarette, the ember glowing like a heartbeat. He watched the people, the buildings, the alleys he had walked countless times. Every brick, every crack, every shadow belonged to him, shaped by his presence and the actions he had taken. The city was alive, chaotic, and dangerous, but it was his city, and he had earned every ounce of control with intelligence, courage, and ferocity. And yet, 3. Even in victory, there was reflection. There would always be threats, always men willing to test limits. But Bumpy had proven once again that threats could be neutralized, that fear could be wielded, and that loyalty and love were weapons as deadly as any gun. Harlem had learned its lesson. Bumpy Johnson's family was untouchable. 3. And anyone who tried to cross him would face consequences beyond imagination. In the quiet after the storm, the streets of Harlem seemed to hum with respect. The city had witnessed something extraordinary. A man who could freeze 200 men with nothing but presence and reputation. A man who had taught the world, again, why he was more than a gangster. He was a legend, a protector, and a force that could not be denied. 3. And in that moment, Bumpy Johnson knew that while the streets were unpredictable, chaotic, and cruel, he had done what no one else could. He had defended his own, exacted justice, and reminded Harlem of the price of crossing him. He didn't need applause. He didn't need recognition. The city remembered, the streets remembered. 3. And history would remember the night when 200 men froze before a single man. Comment below, what would you do if your family was threatened like Bumpy's? Would you freeze, or would you make every single man regret the day they crossed you? Hit like, subscribe, and stay tuned for more untold stories from Harlem's dark underworld.